Just a disclaimer on this one. It's not really planned. Well, none of my videos are specifically planned. But I'm just really speaking from spontaneously. It's not like I'm going to say specifically this and this and this. Let's call it a stream of consciousness video making. I just say what's coming to my mind as I'm recording. Um, I've just watched the question time leaders. I was going to say debate, but it's not really a debate because leaders weren't debating with each other. Um, Watch with my dad, we agreed that the format maybe wasn't the best. It may have been better to see the leaders kind of, um, you know, debating with one another. Also, I noticed a few people in the question time audience at York got to ask more than one question. There was one woman who asked a question to both John Swinney and to I think it was Keir Starmer. That seems a bit unfair. Most people won't get to ask any of the leaders questions. So, I mean, most people in the country. I'm going to make an open question for this video. Is this country broken? I mean, that sounds like a very cynical thing to say, but it's something we've heard a few times, not just in this election, but in other elections as well. The sense that basically things just aren't working. That I've always been a little bit reluctant to make that as a sweeping statement, like the whole country is broken. I think it is a bit of a sweeping statement. Um, and I also think it's important to consider that there are definitely much, much worse places to live in this world. I mean, this isn't Eastern Ukraine. This isn't Yemen. This isn't Haiti. Um, you know, w- there's definitely worse places to live in the world. Facing much bigger hardships in this country. Nevertheless, when you see debate events and you see the public asking politicians questions, I'd say most of the time there's a cynical angle to it. Most of the time, one gets the impression the public is, I mean, there's just a cynical sense. I mean, it's very rare you'll see a member of the public say, "Oh, that's a wonderful policy. I completely agree with you." Much, much more often, it's how do you justify this, or how can you explain that, or it's critical. And I don't want to be a hypocrite. I can be very critical. I've been very critical. Um, and I will say that I think the media does focus more on that. I mean, the debate I've just watched, I think I spotted one or two questions which were sympathetic to the leader being asked the question. There was one woman, an older woman, who asked Sunak a question about migration, and she kind of, um, I mean, he immediately cheered up when she was asking it because she was almost tapping into exactly what his Rwanda policy is. And she was saying, "Yes, I do have confidence that you'll solve this." Not verbatim, but that's what she was saying. Um, but that's it. A lot of other Sunak's other responses were hostile. In fact, there was a chorus of shame on you at the end regarding his stance on the European Court of Human Rights. I will say one thing about that. Technically, Sunak is right. There was a Scottish guy with a black top. If you watch the debate, was very flustered when Sunak said it's a foreign court, but it is in Strasbourg. That's technically true. It's not a domestic court, so by definition, it is a foreign court. Whether people agree with him or not, that statement isn't factually wrong. Um, but on this issue of are things broken, well, let's look. Public transport. I think the railways are a mess. They're overpriced. They're unreliable. Um, this isn't, factoring in all the strikes that have been going on, particularly in the Sunak premiership, under the Sunak premiership. But I don't blame people for not wanting to travel on British Railways today. You may hear the seagulls outside with the chorus. Got the window open because it's warm up here. Um, yeah, I mean, I lost my trail of thought now. Yeah, railways. The thing is, the irony with this is the country that invented railways. We have the world's oldest railways. You'd think we'd have the experience to have something that runs properly. I was in Berlin in December, and I won't say the system was perfect, but the trains ran every few minutes, and if there was delays, I didn't notice them. Here with the Tyne and Wear Metro, it's better than nothing. It's good that we've got it, but they actually say that 15-minute delay is considered as being on time. So that's the threshold. If it's within 15 minutes, then it's considered to be on time. And that's typical of a lot of transit systems across this country. People in the southeast pay a small fortune for a season ticket to get into central London. And people just don't want to travel on the railways anymore. It's stressful, it's overpriced, it's unreliable. So why would they? Um, we also have some stupid rules. I mean, if you, for example, if you miss your train, it may not be your fault. It may be from delays. Say you miss it, and you get on the next train and you have a ticket, and you get on the next train and it's exactly the same route, even the same company, you could get fined for that. That's stupid. I mean, I think if someone bought a ticket, then they should be able to make their journey. So there's certain things I think the railways are out of touch with public opinion. They're far too pricey for a start. Um, and I wouldn't be surprised if bus companies are catching up with this and filling in that void. But then the downside to that is their journeys are very long, but the prices are much better. But yeah, that's one example. The NHS, the waiting list issue, so many people feel disillusioned with that. And again, this gets into industrial strife because junior doctors and nurses feel underpaid and undervalued. And it's an incredibly demanding job. Um, I think the 35% demand isn't really realistic, but I definitely think they should be paid more because, these people were cheered throughout the pandemic and now what? Um, Crime and justice, of course, is the big thing that really, is something I feel very, very strongly about. And there's something about this that I think the public don't always pick up on, which is that, anger's often taken out in politicians, often deservedly so. But the reality is, running for office, politicians talk tough, but what will happen when the Ministry of Justice, when there's this perception that the system is just failing? If you write to the Ministry of Justice, they'll express, sympathy, but they will say, we can't interfere in the judiciary. That's what elected ministers will say. Now, I am convinced that there is a very serious problem in our justice system, which is a detachment from the public on one hand and the legal establishment on the other. The video I made recently about acid attacks is a good example of this. A young guy who was a victim of an acid attack, his attacker, drove 300 miles. It was a case of mistaken identity. He initially got a lengthy sentence, which was then cut in half. And after just 5 years, he got moved to an open prison. Now, he's expressed remorse. I'm talking about the attacker. But how the judge, incidentally, it's the same judge who's currently presiding over the post office inquiry, Justice Wim Williams. I mean, I just find that repulsive that an acid attacker can get just 5 years effectively in a proper prison. That's an example of where our justice system is. And it's not that every single sentence is inappropriate, but I think there is this intense frustration. And I think the vast majority of people feel that the justice system is not on the side of victims. Um, the Court of Appeal, I think, is in a bubble. I don't think, I mean, anyone could write to the Attorney General of England and Wales to get a case reviewed for undue leniency. But the chances of that actually overturning, it's very, very minimal, which shows that the Court of Appeal has a disregard for public opinion. This is the problem that I've got. I think that the people who are making the decisions, the judges and sentencing counsel, don't face anywhere near enough public scrutiny. Now, the sentencing counsel will say that they have public consultation. I know this because I've had communication with them. I've emailed them on this, and they point out that they have public consultation. But I am skeptical how much of that consultation they actually act upon. And particularly the Scottish Sentencing Council, I think that they have this obscene approach whereby if a criminal is under the age of 24, they argue the brain isn't fully developed. Um, that is just if someone has been assaulted by some 20-year-old thug, they don't want to hear, oh well, we better not be too hard on them because that to me is obscene. They can get married, they can join the armed forces, they can vote, they can smoke, they can drink, they can drive, but nah, their brain's not fully developed. It just shows the sheer arrogance of a good portion of the legal class. Um, so is it broken? Well, we don't have a situation where you have prisons looking like human battery farms, although they are overcrowded, and that's a serious problem. And nor do we have the, holiday resorts that amount to Scandinavian prisons. But I do think this disconnect is a major problem. That's why I would like to see judges being far more accountable to the public. I'm not necessarily saying they should be elected, but I think for most people, judges are distant figures. And, in recent years, we've had televised verdicts. So judges have become a little bit more public. But there's been far too many disgracefully lenient sentences, and the public just feel powerless. There's been a few improvements on the Tory watch, very few. Victims have a greater say in parole hearings now. That's good. I give Dominic Raab credit for that. Credit where credit's due. But if you're even if you're not a victim of crime and you're just watching this, y- you'd be forgiven for thinking whose side is the legal establishment on, the justice establishment on? Is it on the side of victims or is it on the side of perpetrators? And again, I'm not saying that every single sentence is inappropriate. There are examples of tough sentences and sentences that match the gravity of the crime, but in far, far too many cases, that isn't the situation. I mean, is there any logical reason why someone who has killed somebody whilst drink driving or seriously injured them should not be banned for life? As the Charity Road piece points out, driving is a privilege, not a right. I mean, it shouldn't just be a given that, oh, there's a right to drive. If you've taken a life with your recklessness, I don't think you should ever be allowed behind a wheel again. And if your job depends on it, tough. Get another job. I mean, that's how I view it. That's why I signed a petition on road peace to that effect. But I mean, as a voter, I'm old enough to know that you can't, in a democracy, get everything you want. That's a very important point that we all have to accept. That's not what democracy is about. It's not about getting everything you want. There is just this sense at the moment that things just don't work. Even recently there was the thing at Manchester Airport where the power went down, and there was huge queues of people and bags were just piled up. I mean, you're never going to get a situation where the country runs just like clockwork and nothing ever. But it just seems to be, when something like that happens, there's a lack of communication. No one knows what's going on. Why? Why are the protocols not put in place? And I wouldn't blame the government for everything. I definitely think there's other powerful bodies involved. I think private companies that run things have a lot of answering to do as well. But there is just this sense of things don't work. And again, probably traveling around the world would put things in context, and you'd actually think, well, actually, Britain's not that bad at all. But I don't think we're a particularly happy country. I think there's a lot of stress and anger in this country, and that's unfortunate. Because I do think Britain's a wonderful country. I do think there's a lot of good things in this country. Starmer was right when he said there's a fundamental decency about the British people and compassion there. He's right about that. But I do think there's an immense sense of frustration. And then you get a cult like Just Stop Oil. It's like they poke the hornet's nest. They just, they tap into this public frustration and they poke it a little bit further with their infantile, stupid, counterproductive stunts. Um, I mean, that's another example. You have this group that's basically holding the public hostage, doing what they want and hiding behind the veil of protest, and they're arrested and they're, brought to court, but they continue doing it. So it's another example of the public look at that and think, why? Why are they getting away with it? So I'm going to conclude with this thought. I don't expect any government to get absolutely everything right, but I do think, I hope that Starmer's government can restore some trust. Now, on the big thing I care about, crime and justice, no political party, no government will be able to, create a situation that I want to see at this point. Armour, he comes from a legal background himself. He'll just say he can't interfere in the judiciary, or better not tell judges what to do. Well, the thing is, I'm not saying that politicians should tell them what sentences to pass. That's not my point. The point is, legislators actually do have power as well. They can set minimum. Well, I don't even know. Do they have that power? They can say what is legal or illegal. The sentencing council. There should be minimum sentencing terms. I just think there's a sheer arrogance from the legal establishment, and politicians talk tough because it's a popular thing to do. But judges, I think a lot of them are living in a bubble, and the sentencing council denies this. I think that the onus should be on them to prove otherwise. They'll explain why they pass the sentence. It's not good enough. I've seen the arguments. I don't think it's good enough, especially when you have aggravating factors of a repeat offender. I mean, in the case of the acid attack I mentioned, the judge said, oh, well, the initial sentence was because the defendant was wrongly deemed to be a threat to society. Well, I'm sorry, if he's driven 300 miles and thrown acid in someone's face, it doesn't matter that he's remorseful for it. That's clearly a dangerous individual. If his anger would have put him into a place where he would do that. Even if he does do it again, 5 years? It's disgusting. And I don't blame the victim for feeling angry at the system. There's just too many damn examples of that. I would say youth crime is another one. I think we're far, far too lenient on violent young offenders, um, particularly when it comes to antisocial behaviour. I'd like to see a really hard crackdown on that. Um, anyway, I'll have one conclusion to the conclusion. When I mean, I'm telling this to myself as much as anyone. It's not all bad. There is a lot of good things in this country too, and we need to. I don't know. Look at that. I'm not going to do a big checklist here and now, but it's not all bad. We're not a war zone. We haven't had a collapsed economy. We don't get natural disasters the way some countries do. Um, Human Development Index here isn't perfect, but it's certainly better than some places. Um, I'm sure there's other things to point out. We have some great heritage, some great culture. Um, so there's a lot of good things about the UK, but I do feel there is a sense that a lot of things are not working. And I think a government cannot get everything right. Starmer's definitely not going to do that in the first year, probably not the first 5 years. But if there could at least be a restoring of confidence, the police is another area. I think trust in the police has really collapsed in recent years. Recently, the head of Northamptonshire, lied on a TV. And we're not talking some beat constable, we're talking about the head of a force. Um, the misogyny and abuse of power that has been in the police in recent years, the lack of consistency in how they police, that's another area. Again, it's broken. People just don't have trust. They don't report crime because they don't think the police will deal with it. That's awful. Um, so, there has been calls for the police to investigate every single crime. It should be that way. And the police themselves, they urge the public to do it. They need to show that they take this seriously. A small shopkeeper constantly getting robbed, a market trader constantly getting robbed. The police need to take that seriously. And I think the public perception is they don't. So there's just so many areas I think need to be worked on.